the invisible army that controls global shipping. The alarm won't stop. 3 skiffs on the starboard bow closing fast. On the bridge, the captain says hold fire. The team leader says not yet, wait for the ladder. Someone shouts range, 2 cables. A red dot wobbles on a windshield. The radio crackles, secure the citadel. Then a phone rings. One call, a voice from London. Divert, do not engage. Your premium hinges on compliance. The ship turns, $1 billion in cargo repriced in seconds. Meanwhile, no navy nearby, no flag state orders coming. From Somali pirates to Red Sea drones, someone else sets the rules now. To see how, we have to rewind. The first fracture, when states lost the deck. It starts where coverage thins and time stretches, the Somali basin in 2008. A Greek-owned bulker runs 12 knots on a glass sea, razor wire still an eccentric idea. The lookout spots a tiny white wake, then another. The captain calls Mombasa radio. Nothing. He calls his owners. They call their broker. Meanwhile, 2 skiffs gain under mothership's shadow, aluminium ladders rattling like bones against the hull. What nobody knew at the time was how far the lines of authority had already frayed. NATO deployments were thin, task forces rotating like seasonal winds, and the ocean was an acreage no navy could fence. The pirates moved faster than policy. They weren't spectral. They were organized crews, reading weather, listening for AIS chatter, hunting the softest targets. Low freeboard, slow speed, no security on deck. Stakes, crew lives first. Then the math behind every supermarket aisle, grains, fuel, parts, suddenly priced with fear. Owners faced impossible choices. Pay ransoms everyone said encouraged more attacks, or risk crews in standoffs no one could guarantee. Insurers felt it too. The numbers began to scratch at spreadsheets in London and Oslo. Action came, but not from admirals. Brokers called ship owners with a new suggestion: higher protection. At first, it felt like the Wild West in a salt spray. Ex-commandos getting calls in cafes, promises of safe transits written in emails, not law. A master hands the rail to 3 men he's never met. They zip-tie ladders, lay out fire hoses, and brief a crew that has never run a citadel drill. The next morning, the ship enters the corridor off Aden, flanked by a rumor of naval cover that might arrive if you last an hour. Meanwhile, a parallel economy appeared offshore, floating armories, rust-streaked vessels at the edge of territorial seas, where teams embarked and disembarked, rifles sealed in bonded lockers to dodge port rules. Jurisdiction was suddenly a chessboard. 12 nautical miles meant something, the EEZ meant something else, and flag states meant everything, until they meant nothing at all. Insurers moved in step, but quietly. Hull underwriters and P&I clubs didn't send warships, they sent incentives. A vessel with armed guards saw premiums ease. A vessel without them saw a number rise like a tide chart. An incentive architecture was born, and with it, a new chain of command that didn't wear uniforms. The International Maritime Organization issued best management practices: razor wire, speed up, harden the bridge. On paper, it was neat. On deck, it was about who had the final say when a skiff cut across the bow. Here's where it gets tight. A master under Liberian flag follows company SOPs. His security team works for a firm registered in Dubai, staffed by Brits and South Africans, paid through a Maltese account, weapons signed out from a Sri Lankan roadstead, and insured by a syndicate on Lime Street. If there's a shooting, who's responsible? If there's a ransom, who decides? The sea, always a place of layered sovereignty, now had a commercial pecking order nobody voted on. One micro-story traveled the industry like a warning. A captain, 30 years at sea, refused to arm his vessel. He trusted speed and maneuver. His owners wanted guards, but agreed to try one last transit unarmed to save costs. 3 days later, he outran 2 skiffs, zigzagging until fuel sloshed low. He made it. The invoice for his courage arrived in a different form. Next renewal, his war risk premium jumped. The boardroom didn't congratulate him. They changed the policy. No guards, no voyages through the corridor. Impact came fast. As armed teams proliferated, attack success rates dropped. Pirates still launched, but citadels held and warning shots mattered. Yet each success stitched the new system tighter. Masters began deferring to team leaders on the bridge wing, not legally required, but practically inevitable. And incident reporting became selective, a misfire here, a flare mistaken there, because every recorded mistake could cost contracts. What nobody knew at the time was how those data points fed a feedback loop thousands of miles away. Brokers compiled incident logs, drew heat maps from AIS anomalies, and pitched risk profiles that felt like weather forecasts. Owners didn't just sail, they optimized a spreadsheet with a hull attached, routes bent to ratings, sail dates nudged to unlock cheaper cover. A corridor wasn't a line on a chart anymore, it was a compliance regime. Meanwhile, flags of convenience, the habit of registering ships where rules bend, gave everyone an escape hatch. If one registry demanded tighter control of armories or crew certifications, there were others with lighter touches. The fragmentation entrenched itself because it was profitable. Each player, owner, insurer, security firm, could point at the next link in the chain and say, "We're following guidance." Responsibility diffused like diesel on water. This was the moment everything changed, even if the headlines kept saying pirates. The first fracture wasn't a gunshot, it was a contract clause. Authority, once presumed to flow from navies and flag states, began to flow from premiums, exclusions, and warranties. By 2011, a captain's most important call wasn't to a warship. It was to the broker who could move a slider and decide whether the ship sailed today or waited for an escort that didn't exist. In the aftermath, the seas got safer in one narrow sense, fewer boardings, but more complicated in every other. A new industry stood up overnight, with armories offshore, teams on standby, and legal grey zones that could only be crossed with a stamped invoice. States hadn't vanished. They were just late. Markets weren't brave. They were fast. And once money found the lanes, it drew its own maps. Birth of a shadow industry, PMSCs at sea. Once money started flowing, the call sheets lit up. Former Royal Marines, French Fusiliers, South African recce vets. Phones pinged with forward offers. Aden run, 2 weeks. Companies with names that sounded like trust funds and call signs appeared overnight. They promised embarked teams within 48 hours, turnkey protection, compliant paperwork. Owners didn't ask for poetry. They asked for a corridor crossing without a ransom note. Teams arrived with duffels and laminated SOPs. The model hardened fast. Transit, the internationally recommended transit corridor. Raise speed at dusk. Rig razor wire on the poop and the forecastle. Stack sandbags around the bridge wings. Walk the rail in pairs. Drill the citadel, food, water, VHF, sat phone, a deadbolt from inside. It was choreography, warn, deter, delay, deny. If ladders hit steel, the drill clock started. Arms logistics became its own ecosystem. You couldn't bring rifles ashore in Muscat or Mumbai, so weapons lived offshore. Floating armories, old supply ships and decommissioned freighters sat just beyond territorial waters. Teams embarked by launch, signed out carbons from bonded lockers, and re-embarked the same way after the run. The ledger handled the legality, serial numbers, seals, custody logs witnessed by notaries at sea. It was compliance in swell and diesel fumes. Competition drove the pitch, deck plates filled with stories that doubled as sails. Last week, we repelled a swarm at 2 cables. New intel says aluminium ladders with grapnels, longer reach. You need taller wire. Threat narratives edged up because budgets tracked fear. The promises edged too. Some firms pushed kinetic deterrence as a feature. Others sold restraint and courtroom-proof reporting. Owners chose their doctrine with a purchase order. Vetting was the weak scene. CVs traveled faster than background checks. A man who'd guarded embassies in Basra on paper turned out to be a nightclub bouncer in Cape Town. Another listed anti-piracy quals that were a cut and paste from someone else's LinkedIn. Training varied by hour and invoice. One day, a crew learned disciplined arcs of fire. The next, they were told to fire warning shots near but not at, a sentence that collapsed under stress. On the bridge, the master's authority thinned in increments. The team leader would stand on the wing at twilight, scanning the horizon, and call course adjustments that felt like commands. Nobody wrote that down as policy. It was just how you made it to Suez on schedule. And incident reporting, the lifeblood of insurance decisions, got murky. A flare misread as tracers, a fishing dhow logged as a fast mover, a warning shot that skipped too close, details smoothed in the PDF sent to the client. Then came the incident that changed doctrine. A fireship moment with no fire, a fishing boat misidentified, a burst of rounds, bodies in the water, and a port state that refused to accept the offshore paperwork as absolution. Diplomats were called. The shooters were detained. The ship was impounded. Headlines treated contracted guards like mercenaries. The legal argument was messy. Flag state jurisdiction, territorial waters, self-defense thresholds, chain of custody on the Armory-issued rifles. None of it played well on television. The immediate impact hit the one place everyone watched: insurance approvals. Underwriters updated matrices overnight. Firms without credible vetting lost their approved provider status. SOPs were rewritten with more do-nots than do's. Warning shots needed video. Range calls needed corroboration. A ladder on the rail wasn't enough. Imminent threat had to be documented. Captains demanded that team leaders sign the log, not just initial it. The industry, still young, learned the price of a burst at the wrong time. Meanwhile, a parallel track matured, the audit trail. Companies hired compliance officers who'd never set foot on a deck to backfill the thin spots. They built incident templates, ran desktop rehearsals, and insisted on GoPros clipped to tack vests. If a skiff veered away at 500 meters, there'd be a still frame and a timestamp. If a flare went up, GPS coordinates would sit on a spreadsheet by nightfall. It wasn't just defense, it was evidence built for the market. The corridor itself became a product. PMSCs sold package transits that bundled embarked teams, razor wire kits, liaison with naval task forces, and guaranteed embark-disembark windows at waypoints outside Omani or Yemeni waters. The timing was the value. Miss the window, pay for another armory transfer, lose a day, slip a slot in Jebel Ali. Owners learned that security choices were scheduling choices, and scheduling was money. Not every operator stayed in the gun lane. Some pivoted to soft muscle, voyage risk assessments, compliance with best management practices, crew training modules delivered by former chiefs with calm voices. Others linked up with intel vendors, offering a daily brief layered onto the guard package. AIS anomalies flagged at dawn, rumored pirate action group sightings plotted against your ETA. The pitch evolved from "we'll shoot" to "we'll keep you away from the moment where shooting becomes an option." A micro-story made the rounds after the doctrine shift. A tanker master, uneasy after the misidentification case, ordered his team to keep rifles slung unless a ladder touched steel. At 1 a.m., 2 skiffs pushed in under moonlight, lights doused, engines droning. The team leader held his men, flares first, fire hose, hard turn starboard. The skiffs peeled off when a naval helicopter's rotors thumped somewhere beyond the dark. The master slept 2 hours that night. His owners slept better when their broker emailed the renewed approval. Compliant, low-risk transit completed, no rounds expended. By then, the shadow industry had a rhythm. Recruit, embark, deter, disembark, invoice. It layered compliance over seamanship and turned risk into a service line. It looked private, but its heartbeat matched the markets. The rules of engagement, written in company manuals, were really written in premiums and reputational risk. And while rifles sat on deck, the real weapon was the story each firm could tell about what happened on that rail and what didn't. The invisible hand on the helm, insurers and brokers. While guards walked the rails, decisions that mattered were being made under soft lights in London. A broker opens a laptop, pulls up a route line from Singapore to Rotterdam, and overlays a heat map fed by incident reports and AIS pings. The owner on the call wants speed. The underwriter wants certainty. The price of certainty is a list of conditions. Stakes first. It's not just the hull. It's cargo financing, charter party penalties, and the owner's access to credit. One mistake and a ship loses cover in the middle of a voyage. A crew doesn't just face skiffs. They face the risk that a claim won't be honored if a box wasn't ticked. Insurance isn't paperwork. It's permission to keep moving. Here's the action. Hull and cargo underwriters didn't tell captains what to do. They told them what would be insurable. The joint war committees, listed areas, functioned like invisible buoys. Cross this line, and your war risk clause triggers. Notify your market, pay the additional premium, adhere to the endorsed security posture. A ship with an approved PMSC and documented BMP compliance got a different number than one without. The spreadsheet decided what looked brave and what looked reckless. Brokers built bundles. A call sheet looked like this. Corridor transit scheduled on Tuesday. Embarked team from an approved provider. Razor wire photographed. Citadel checklist signed. Intel feed subscribed for the week of passage. Each item shaved basis points off a premium. Miss one and the slider moved the other way. Owners learned to buy security packages, the way airlines sell add-ons. Seat, bag, early boarding. Except here, early boarding meant a legal gun on your deck. Meanwhile, data hardened into doctrine. AIS tracks showed who slowed near Bab al-Mandab. Incident reports, cleaned by compliance teams, fed models that spat out risk scores by lane, month, and time of day. What nobody on deck knew was how a flare fired at 01:14 one night ended up as a dot on a quarterly risk dashboard that nudged a global carrier to shift schedules by 6 hours across an entire fleet. The impact was tangible. War risk clauses, once boilerplate, turned into tripwires. A sudden designation could force a diversion around the Cape of Good Hope, burning days and fuel, but sometimes saving on a premium that would have eaten the margin. Owners didn't route by geography, they routed by insurability. A straight line on a chart bent to avoid not just missiles or skiffs, but an underwriter's appetite on a Wednesday. There was a human rhythm to the machine, a micro story. A broker in Lime Street takes a call at 4 a.m. A container vessel has a last-minute slot through Suez, but the approved PMSC's embark window slipped. The owner asks, "Can we go unguarded if we accelerate?" The broker scrolls. The risk model says no, not this week. He offers Plan B, a different provider, higher day rate, lower premium uplift, total cost net down by 5 figures. The ship waits 6 hours, embarks a team from a floating armory, and sails. The captain never speaks to the broker. The route changed because a cursor moved over a cell. Brokers also gate-kept vendors. Some PMSCs found out they were non-approved when bids came back with a quiet no. The criteria lived in matrices built by people who'd never stood a mid-watch, but who read loss runs like scripture. One fatal misidentification halfway around the world could end a firm's year in 3 emails. In this world, reputation wasn't what crews said, it was what claims said. Owners pushed back where they could. A few tried to self-insure portions of risk, betting on speed and luck to dodge surcharges. Most didn't. Bankers tied lending covenants to recognized underwriters. Charterers demanded evidence of compliance not just for legal comfort, but to keep their own insurance intact upstream. The chain tightened until optimization felt like obedience. Meanwhile, the JWC's designations weren't static. When missiles and drones started to matter more than ladders, the models pivoted. A rifle on a rail couldn't shoot down a UAV. Underwriters began asking about yield kits, decoys, and intel corridors. PMSCs that couldn't offer those pieces had to partner with firms that could. Security turned into a layered service stack, and the broker stitched it together. Impact rippled beyond one voyage. When enough ships diverted, freight rates shifted, schedules slipped, and warehouse inventories ticked down in cities that had never heard of a joint war list. A few boardrooms in London and Zurich were effectively nudging global trade like a joystick, never admitting as much, always insisting it was just prudent pricing. The map on the wall said routes were free. The binders on the table said which ones were viable. This was the quiet transfer of command. Captains still gave orders on the bridge, but the strategic calls were made by people who could bind, cover, or cancel it. Governments issued advisories, underwriters issued terms. The difference was enforceability. An advisory you could ignore, a term you couldn't. In practice, premiums, exclusions, and warranties overrode flags, corridors, and even admirals' briefings. And when something went wrong, the paperwork decided the story. Claims teams asked, were guards approved? Was the Citadel drilled? Was speed maintained? Was the intel subscription active? A yes meant a check. A no meant an argument. After enough arguments, entire fleets learned to walk the same path, not because a law said so, but because the money did. From pirates to missiles, the Red Sea shock. While underwriters fine-tuned risk sliders, a different sound entered the bridge, the flat, clinical tone of a missile warning. The Bab al-Mandab wasn't about ladders anymore. It was about anti-ship ballistic missiles arcing from inland pads, one-way attack drones riding sea breezes, and fast boats playing decoy under radar clutter. A guard with a carbine looked at the sky and knew he was out of his lane. Stakes jumped from crew-level danger to system-wide fragility. A single strike on a product tanker didn't just threaten lives, it threatened choke points that carry a double-digit share of global trade. Insurers weren't just pricing a hull, they were pricing delivery times, refinery runs, shelf inventories. The margin for error vanished. The war list widened. War risk premiums rose. And some carriers didn't just pay more, they stopped calling. Action started with rerouting. Owners got the call: avoid Suez, take the long way round. Cape of Good Hope schedules replaced canal ETAs. The math was brutal. 10 to 14 extra days, more bunkers, more crew time, more charters disrupted. But the alternative was a missile envelope you couldn't outmaneuver. For navies, intercepts became a daily grind. Destroyers burning through missiles to kill drones that cost a fraction of a fraction. For shipmasters, the checklist changed. Chaff launchers, decoys, radar silence windows, convoy timings aligned to overhead patrols. On one afternoon, a captain off Eritrea felt the ship hum differently. The electronic warfare box had been powered on by a contractor he'd never met. It promised to confuse seekers. It might also confuse his own sensors. He signed the log anyway. The underwriter required a yield posture for transit. Meanwhile, intelligence briefs went from pirate skiff sightings to launcher signatures inland, UAV flight paths, and probable target selection logic. The threat wasn't coming from a wake. It was coming from beyond the horizon and above it. Impact hit the ledger immediately. Premiums didn't just climb, they spiked in discrete bursts tied to attack clusters. JWC-listed areas expanded north. Some underwriters carved out exclusions for vessels linked to certain flags or trades. Brokers fielded 4 a.m. pleas from owners desperate for coverage windows. Freight rates followed the fear curve. Warehouses in Europe padded inventory. Fuel bills rose with every loop around Africa. By mid-year, the tonnage through Suez had dropped sharply. Arrivals off the Cape surged. It wasn't about bravery. It was about insurability on any given week. PMSCs felt the ground shift under their boots. A 4-man rifle team couldn't deter a MAC number. Their value proposition moved from "we hold the rail" to "we integrate with systems." Some partnered with defense contractors to offer decoy kits and radar advisors. Others pivoted into liaison roles, coordinating with multinational task forces for corridor time slots, encrypting comms, syncing ship transits to windows when patrol aircraft could cover. A few firms tried to sell shoulder-fired solutions and learned quickly that escalation could bring states to the gangway. Nobody wanted a private SAM on a commercial deck. Meanwhile, non-state actors learned leverage in real time. They didn't need to sink ships. They needed to raise costs. A shot across a bow, a drone intercepted high, a single hull damaged but afloat. Each event echoed into premiums and delays. What nobody on shore saw was the sender's calculus. Force enough diversions, and you extract influence without occupying an inch of sea. It was anti-access by spreadsheet. A micro story. A container ship approaching the southern Red Sea receives a secure message from an intel vendor. Drone activity increased in Sector Delta, advised delay. The captain looks at his schedule. A narrow slot at Rotterdam, a charter party clause that penalizes late arrival. The owner calls the broker. The broker checks the war market appetite. The advice returns. Hold 20 hours, join an escorted stream, deploy decoys as per protocol. The master heaves to, engines idling. Cargo destined for a supermarket aisle 3 weeks later will arrive a day late. No one in that aisle will know about the 20 hours off Eritrea. Navies created corridors with rules that read like insurance annexes. Report position at fixed intervals, maintain speed, no deviations, follow the lead ship, comply with EMCON guidance. Public power and private compliance braided together. Governments brought guns, markets brought obedience. The chain of command ran through a shared dashboard nobody owned outright. Insurers expanded their questionnaires. Do you carry EU decoys? CIWS on charter? Are bridge teams trained in drone recognition? Do you subscribe to verified incident intelligence? Answers translated into points, and points into pricing. Captains learned to run anti-drone drills the way they'd once run anti-boarding drills. Dim lights, chaff ready, fire teams briefed to stay disciplined if a splashdown showered the deck with fragments. Crew stress climbed. The threat clock never really stopped. Then came the environmental fear. A crude tanker hit and burning in a narrow sea isn't just a claim, it's a coastline condemned. Salvors rehearsed nightmare scenarios. Port states prepared contingency plans and asked who would pay. Underwriters factored catastrophic spill risk into a model that had previously cared mostly about ransoms and delays. The stakes weren't margins anymore, they were fisheries and desalination plants. In the aftermath of the first season of missile and drone attacks, a pattern settled in. Carriers stratified. Some committed to the detour as a policy, others danced between windows of perceived safety. PMSCs rebranded as Maritime Risk Integrators. Brokers bundled intel, and escorted slots the way they once bundled razor wire and rifles. And captains, still standing watch, looked up as often as they looked out. The sea lanes hadn't closed. They'd been repriced by the sky. The grey intel web, private maritime intelligence. Meanwhile, something else was happening behind the dashboards. Ship owners started buying time, not bullets. Time measured in minutes of warning, meters of standoff, and days shaved from delays. The sellers weren't admirals. They were private intel shops stitching together open sources, commercial satellites, and whispers you couldn't cite in court but couldn't ignore on watch. Stakes first. A bad map gets people hurt. If a captain sails into an unmarked threat envelope, it's not just a crew at risk. It's a claim denied because foreseeable hazards weren't mitigated. What insurers priced as risk, intel vendors repackaged as foresight. Don't just comply, predict. Here's how it looked in action. In a nondescript office in Dubai, analysts sat over coffee and screens. One watched AIS feeds for anomalies, ships blinking out near known staging points, then reappearing too neatly aligned with safe lanes. Another cued a high-res satellite tasking over a coastal strip where launchers were rumored to move at dusk. A third scraped port agent group chats for chatter about quiet nights that meant anything but. Every 30 minutes, their system pushed a scored alert to subscribed vessels. Risk up, hold speed. Risk down, transit window 04060. Unknowns rising, consider offset by 3 nautical miles west. What nobody on deck knew was how fast private alerts beat official notices. Naval advisories were vetted, cautious, sometimes 12 hours late. Private briefs arrived in near real time, flagged, confidence, medium, with a note. Source corroborated twice, imagery pending. Captains learned to live with ambiguity because speed beats sovereignty. You could wait for an acronym stamp, or you could move before sunrise. Vendor locking crept in quietly. One firm's risk map used a color gradient nobody else did. Their red wasn't the other's red. But once an owner aligned procedures to that gradient, it became doctrine. Bridge teams trained to the firm's threat lexicon. Charterers embedded those maps in routing memos. Change the vendor, and you weren't just swapping a product, you were retraining a fleet. Contracts stretched from months to years. The map on your ECDIS wasn't just hydrography anymore. It was the vendor's outlook. Microstory. A captain crossing the Arabian Sea gets a ping. Sector Echo shows elevated UAV telemetry. His official advisory is stale, last updated a day ago. The private alert suggests a dogleg 60 miles south, adding 4 hours. He calls the DPA ashore. The answer isn't a command. It's a costed option already computed. Detour plus fuel versus premium uplift if they hold course. The captain shifts rudder 2 degrees. 4 weeks later, a competitor who ignored similar alerts files a near-miss report and a remedial training plan to keep coverage. Meanwhile, some intel didn't come from space or screens. Quiet deals with regional actors shaped routes without a paper trail. A port agent in a narrow coast state town knew which militia checkpoint manned the headland tonight and which one tomorrow. A facilitator promised a calm window if a ship hugged a certain contour line for 20 minutes. The fee wasn't called protection, it was expedited services. The result felt like safe passage. The ledger recorded it as port costs. Intelligence became extortion insurance by another name. Pay for the map or sail blind. Vendors marketed exposure reduction the way alarm companies sell peace of mind. Owners who balked found themselves frozen out of broker bundles. The broker's checklist read, approved Intel subscription, yes, no. A no didn't always kill coverage, but it made the slider unforgiving. The cost of skepticism rose until it wasn't worth arguing. Data shaped people. Bridge teams started every watch with a threat brief. Today's profile, decoys likely offshore, drones favor dusk, surface contacts in clusters of 3, 2 visible, 1 shadow. The watch officer glanced less at the wake and more at a tablet that stitched radar returns to heat signatures to yesterday's overflight. The marvel became the risk. Overtrust the feed, and you missed the fishing dhow angling into your bow because no model marked him red. Then there was the darker layer, counterintelligence. Some actors learned to throw sand in the data gears. Spoofed AIS flooded grids with ghost convoys. A false, safe corridor rumor nudged ships into a timed ambush. Vendors responded with signature analysis and trust scores for sources. The invisible fight moved from sea lanes to data lanes. Impact rippled up the chain. Insurers wrote clauses that referenced recognized risk intelligence providers, undefined in law, definitive in practice. Governments quietly asked those same vendors for briefings because the private pipes were faster. The irony strung. States relying on dashboards they didn't control, operators paying for alerts that shaped naval patrol plans they couldn't see. A last micro-story carried the moral. A bulk carrier, lean on budget, sailed with no subscription, trusting public notices. At 20, a private vendor flagged a launch signature inland and a likely target set by course and profile. A client vessel 2 miles astern got the ping, dimmed lights, shifted speed, and slid behind a tanker in a convoy stream. The bulk carrier's bridge never knew. They heard a splash downring and later read about a near-area event. Their premium didn't spike, but their nerve did. The next month, their procurement team signed a 1-year intel package without haggling. Intelligence had become a commodity, but not a neutral one. It carried leverage, bias, and rent. It bought safety, and it sold dependence. And it set up the next shift. Maps without muscle aren't guarantees. To turn forecasts into safe wake, owners would have to buy teeth. Protection economies, convoys, escorts, and facilitation. Intel could warn, but it couldn't clear the lane. That's when money started buying formation. Private convoys appeared like pop-up roads at sea, pay-to-join streams moving through risk corridors at fixed speeds, tight comms, and shared watch. The pitch was simple. Alone you're a target, together you're a schedule. A vendor set the rendezvous, certified subscribers, and assigned a lead ship with encrypted chat. Missed the RV by an hour and you weren't just late, you were outside the shield you paid for. Stakes were human and financial. For crews, a convoy meant less white-knuckle watch because a second radar and a third pair of eyes caught what one might miss. For owners, fines and demurrage evaporated if the stream hit the window. But the real leverage lived in insurance. A convoy slot, documented by the organizer, could shave a war risk uplift. Without it, the slider moved the other way. Convoys weren't nostalgia, they were a line item. Action looked like choreography. Ships fanned into a staggered line abreast, boat bow offsets to frustrate seekers. The lead carried the comms protocol, the tail logged every sensor blip. The organizer piped intel updates. Sector Bravo drone telemetry elevated, Reduce M's signature hold course. Private patrol boats idled at the flanks, cameras on gimbals, unarmed but loud on VHF. The moral hazard was obvious. The more the stream proved valuable, the more someone could charge to join. Meanwhile, states rented their flag. Cost recovery escorts, naval hulls selling presence by the mile, blurred the line between public duty and private service. The brochure language called it assured security corridors. The invoice read like a charter party. A frigate set the pace. A destroyer scanned the sky. The conditions were strict. Report positions, no sudden maneuvers, obey the Escorts EMCON. For a price, a national navy became a quasi-private guardian, and paperwork stapled the arrangement to an insurer's approval. Micro-story. A reefer missing a convoy cutoff begged for an escort slot. A regional navy offered a late-night add-on for a premium that made the owner wince. He paid. The next day, 2 small boats tested the line at dawn. The frigate's hello lifted, hovered, and the boats veered. The captain wrote 1 extra entry in the log: escort presence decisive. The invoice attached to that sentence became proof for the next renewal. Parallel to formal streams, a quieter economy thrived at the pier. Port agents, fixers with grease under their nails and contacts in every harbor office, sold facilitation. Not bribes, they'd say, but expediting. A phone call to a Coast Guard cousin moved a sail time to a calmer hour. A militia checkpoint ashore agreed to hold exercises inland while a convoy passed. The fees flowed as port costs or security coordination. The effect felt like assurance. The risk was consent. Sovereignty turned transactional. Coast Guards moonlighted, renting patrols off duty, running escorts in everything but name. Militia commanders demanded inspection support payments, reciprocal for no interference. The more it paid, the more it existed. Threats clustered where protection sold best, and corridors shifted to intersect those toll booths. You could call it navigation. It looked like taxation. Insurers tried to tame it with clauses: proof of escort, proof of convoy, certified timestamps, vetted facilitators. Brokers pushed owners toward reputable streams tied to recognized navies or established vendors. But the temptation to save a day with a handshake at the pier lingered. A captain, bone-tired, took an agent's offer. Hug the headland at midnight. They'll be quiet. He made it. 6 weeks later, a competitor tried the same trick on a noisier night and took fragments across the forecastle. The next day, the agent's number stopped working. Private patrol craft multiplied. Some flew the livery of security firms, others a coat of paint that meant nothing and everything. They used loud hailers, flares, and cameras. They rarely carried heavy weapons. Licensing and escalation risk made sure of that. Their real service was documentation, high-definition proof that a ship behaved, that a skiff approached, that deterrence worked. Claims handlers loved footage. Regulators tolerated presence. Captains tolerated noise. The convoy model evolved into tiers. Tier 1, state-escorted corridors with strict compliance. Tier 2, private convoys with vetted intel feeds and liaison to task forces. Tier 3, facilitated passage, legal grey wrapped in plausible deniability. Prices mapped to comfort. And because comfort priced premiums, the tiers hardened into doctrine. But here's the catch. Markets chased certainty, and certainty paid for guards at gates. The more predictable the stream, the more valuable the gatekeeper. A broker's spreadsheet reflected it. A militia's ledger exploited it. Protection begat protection. Each fee felt like a solution. In aggregate, it looked like a business model that needed the threat to stay just high enough. A captain summed it up in a quiet line to his mate as they joined a night convoy. We're buying time from people who sell it because someone else sells the fear. The radar swept. The escort's silhouette held steady ahead, and the ship slid into a lane that didn't exist on any chart, enforced by money more than law. The war risk machine, P&I clubs and clauses. While convoys stitched order into dangerous water, another engine quietly set the metronome. The clubs. Protection and indemnity wasn't glossy marketing. It was the fine print that decided who shouldered what when things went wrong. Owners joined mutuals for third-party liabilities. Pollution, crew injury, wreck removal. But the moment a threat looked like war or terror, those liabilities slid toward a different bucket: war risks. And the boundary between buckets was policed by clauses that read like tripwires. Stakes were personal and structural. To a captain, a clause could mean the difference between help and an argument after a hit. To an owner, it was solvency. One wrong exclusion, and a spill cleanup or injury claim landed outside the tent. Clubs published rules with calm language, exclusions for war and hostile acts, piracy carved carefully, special war risks excess layers capped at defined limits, sanctions screens always on. Calm words, sharp edges. Action started in the renewal season. Club case handlers and loss prevention teams met owners with checklists that weren't suggestions. Do you have a Citadel meeting best management practices? Are crew anti-boarding drills documented? Are guard providers approved, vetted, and contracted with clear use of force rules? Have you filed trading warranties for listed areas? Embedded in each item was leverage. Tick every box and your entry stayed steady. Miss one, and conditions attached like barnacles. War risk clauses behaved like choreography cues. Enter a joint war committee listed area. Notify, pay the additional premium, comply with endorsed security and intel frameworks. Clubs coordinated with hull war underwriters. The hull market handled the big bang, physical loss, war perils. The club managed liabilities long tail, cleanup, third-party injury, fines. Where the hull policy stopped, the club's excess war P&I might start, but only if warranties were honored. A captain's logline about drills and speed became evidence in a coverage decision months later. Micro-story. A product tanker brushed by missile fragments limped into a safe port. No hull breach, but deck crew inhaled smoke, one hospitalized. The owner called his club. First question, listed area notification filed before transit. Second, convoy or escort proof. Third, crew training records for missile drone response. The documents were clean, time-stamped, tied to a recognized intel feed. The club indemnified crew costs swiftly, coordinated with war underwriters on the rest. The captain's habit of signing the drill sheet at 60 turned into money. Claims precedents hardened doctrine. After a misidentification shooting years earlier, clubs and underwriters issued circulars with sharper words and use of force and evidence capture. Body cams became standard. Incident statements needed corroboration. One club's board reviewed a messy claim and decided future cover would hinge on guard provider accreditation against a list maintained in London. Overnight, a dozen PMSCs fell off matrices. Brokers quietly blacklisted them. A paragraph in a circular reconfigured a market. Sanctions clauses bit hard, trading into grey routes to chase arbitrage profits. Clubs embedded exclusions that triggered if a voyage exposed the mutual to sanction risk. Owners built shell games with flags and managers. Clubs built compliance teams with data feeds to unwind them. A vessel approached a high-risk anchorage for ship-to-ship transfer. The club queried counterpart identity, beneficial ownership, AIS patterns. The captain saw a calm sea. The club saw a sanctions maze. Box sticking became doctrine because courts respect boxes. Clubs wrote model terms into charter parties and COUs, maintain speed thresholds in hot zones, keep citadels stocked, subscribe to recognized risk information providers, document adherence. Captains groaned at the paperwork, but each signature turned risk into insurable fact. And when a claim landed, adjusters reached for the doctrine first, the sympathy later. Meanwhile, clubs talked to each other. Loss experiences circulated across the international group, shaping pooling agreements and excess reinsurance. A spike in Red Sea liabilities forced a recalibration of aggregate limits and sublimits for biochem exclusions, cyber knock-ons, and crew evacuation costs. Members saw it as a surcharge. Clubs called it prudence. Either way, premiums and deductibles flexed to the new physics. A quiet feedback loop ran through lawyers' offices. After-action litigation over collisions in convoys, fender benders during high-stress maneuvers, and cargo contamination after reroutes produced settlements that turned into new guidance. Maintain separation X under EMCONY wasn't a naval rule. It was born in a claim file with a docket number. Captains learned those numbers because their ops teams taped them to the standing orders. And then there were the riders. Cyber at sea had a clause now. So did drone visibility training. So did deviation for crew safety, a protective carve-out that allowed captains to avoid hot zones without breaching charter obligations if documented and advised. Clubs wrote humane discretion back into rigid contracts, conditional, evidenced, enforceable. The impact, de facto regulation by contract. Flag states issued advisories. Clubs issued terms backed by pooled capital and reinsurance towers. Courts interpreted law. Adjusters interpreted logbooks. Owners optimized for checklists. Brokers priced compliance. Captains narrated every hour like a deposition. Meanwhile, non-state actors watched the same circulars and learned which buttons to press to raise costs without firing a lethal shot. Floating armories and legal twilight. Unknown to most passengers flying over the Indian Ocean, a second port system sat beyond the horizon, ships that never really went anywhere, but changed everything for those that did. There were floating armories, old supply vessels and tired freighters anchored just outside 12 nautical miles, bobbing in legal daylight where port laws couldn't quite reach. Teams came and went by launch. Boxes clicked open. Seals broke. Rifles moved from bonded lockers to duffels with barcode tags and chain of custody logs that could survive a courtroom, at least on paper. Stakes were simple and messy. Without armories, embarked guards were a non-starter in half the region. With them, transit windows were possible, premiums tolerable, crews calmer. But every transfer walked a tightrope. If a misfire happened later, which jurisdiction owned the bullet's story? The armory's flag state, the client's ship's flag, the coastal state frowning at silhouettes near its line on the chart. Everyone could claim authority. Nobody could prove it at 02:30 in swell. Action looked like a bus terminal at sea. A PMSC skiff eased alongside the armory's stern ladder. A clipboard appeared. Serial numbers matched manifests. Tamper seals were photographed against the day's newspaper to timestamp authenticity. 2 guards signed under a clause that said they accepted custody within international waters under flag state supervision. Then came the hop to the client vessel, waiting just beyond the rendezvous, engines idling to keep station. The handoff took 12 minutes when it worked. It took hours when weather turned or a patrol boat decided to circle and ask questions in a language nobody on the skiff spoke well. Meanwhile, armory operators played jurisdiction chess. They kept anchors just outside territorial seas, drift alarms set to the meter. They chose flags that didn't mind that their port facility never touched land. They hired masters who understood how to split paperwork so a customs search would find compliance, not contraband. They paid lawyers to write memos explaining why a locker afloat was no different, in law, from a secure warehouse ashore. Coastal states read those memos and rolled their eyes. Complications piled up where theory met recall. Negligent discharges on client decks became diplomatic incidents with evidence chains tied to ships that never docked. A mislabeled crate held magazines that didn't fit the rifles listed, fixed by zip ties and improvisation on a rolling deck. A missing GoPro file triggered an allegation of tampering that torpedoed a claim. When shots were fired in anger, investigators needed custody from procurement to casing. The link back to the armory lived on laminated forms smudged with salt. Arms diversion sat like a shadow. Operators swore by audits and reconciliations. But weapons are portable, the sea is large, and not every operator ran tight. A crate skipped a line item here, a serial number transposed there, and suddenly a carbon showed up in a coastal raid with a provenance nobody wanted to trace. Insurers started asking for third-party audits of armory stock. Brokers asked which armory serviced the transit. Quiet lists emerged. Use these 3, avoid those 2. Coastal states pushed back with fees dressed as maritime safety certificates, periodic inspections, and sometimes seizures. A patrol cutter boarded an armory at dawn, cited environmental rules and towed her in. The armory's operator shouted high seas. The Coast Guard pointed to GPS drift inside 12 miles during the night. Fines landed. Weapons went into bonded custody ashore. Teams missed their windows. Owners missed convoys. A week later, a meeting in the capital produced a new licensing framework. The framework came with receipts. Microstory. A captain inbound to the Gulf of Aden got word his embarked team couldn't disembark at the usual armory. Local politics. Unexpected inspection. The fallback armory sat 40 miles east, in rougher water, run by a newer outfit with a glossy brochure and thinner logs. He weighed time, fuel, and risk. He chose to hold the team on board past the corridor and steam north to a port that allowed controlled offloads, at a price, and with paperwork that singed his patience. His owners complained about delays until their broker sent a polite note. The fallback armory had just been flagged by underwriters after a custody discrepancy. The captain's caution saved a future claim from dying on a technicality. Accountability tried to catch up. Some armories installed 24/7 cameras over lockers, streaming to land-based auditors. Others adopted tamper-evident RFID seals that pinged on movement. A few invited surprise inspections by recognized classification societies, hoping a seal of process would satisfy both insurers and coastal states. It helped, until a single scandal elsewhere reset trust industry-wide, and everyone paid for the weakest operators' shortcuts. Impact rippled through routes and budgets. Each added fee, audit, or seizure risk nudged owners toward armory hubs with political cover, concentrating power in fewer hands. PMSCs that owned or controlled access to those hubs could dictate embark windows and, by extension, convoy slots. Legal twilight turned into commercial leverage. If you weren't on the list, you waited outside the door with a ship that burned cash by the hour. And here's the deeper shift. Floating armories didn't just store rifles. They stored plausible deniability. They let ports keep clean ledgers while ships carried guns offshore. They let flags claim oversight while outsourcing it to a deckhand with a clipboard. They let insurers price safety while burying chain of custody complexity in attachments. Everyone got what they needed, until a shot went wrong and the dawn brought lawyers, not launches. Flashpoint case, misidentification and murder at sea. It began as another nervous dusk in the corridor. A small wooden boat drifted across the bow of an Italian-flagged merchant ship making 12 knots. No name stenciled, no AIS, nets piled like a roof. On the bridge wing, the private team raised binoculars. The coxswain's arm lifted, hard to tell if it was a wave or a reach. The range call came too fast, the wind too stiff, the briefing too thin. A burst cracked out. Bodies fell into water that didn't care who was wrong. Stakes hit like a slap. One decision on a moving deck pulled diplomats, insurers, and prosecutors into the same room. A fisherman's family wanted answers. A port state wanted jurisdiction. A flag state wanted caution. The company wanted distance. The team wanted a phone call. The sea gave them none. A coastal patrol boat made the decision for everyone. Board, confiscate weapons, detain the shooters, and order the ship into port. The headlines wrote themselves. Action was immediate and messy. The master read the legal template in his SMS and found no line for fatal shots in disputed waters. The team leader argued self-defense, fast approach, non-compliant maneuvers, hand signals misread as grapnels. The on-scene officers demanded ballistics and custody. Chain of custody paperwork pointed back to a floating armory beyond 12 miles. The coastal prosecutor didn't care about seals and signatures from a ship that had never docked. He cared about holes in a hull and a dead man on a pier. Meanwhile, across time zones, phones lit up in offices that had never smelled bunker fuel. The PMSC's managing director called his broker would cover stand. The broker, called the underwriter, was the provider approved at the time of embarkation. The underwriter, called the club, would liabilities attach under war or under P&I, and did the piracy exception help or hurt? The answers multiplied like branches. Each link asked for evidence the deck didn't preserve. What nobody in the first hours could straighten was the map. Were they inside territorial waters or on the thin seam just outside? The ECDIS said one thing, the patrol boat said another. The fishermen had no GPS. The ship's VDR recorded course and speed, but microphones caught only wind, adrenaline, and a shouted, "Not yet," that prosecutors read as shoot. Meanwhile, families gathered on the quay. A picture of a boy in a school uniform ran above a story about foreign guns. Impact traveled in rings. The PMSC's approvals vanished in a day. An email from London removed them from the matrix. Pending investigation, not to be used. Competitors updated SOPs overnight. No firing unless a ladder touches steel. No warning shots near bows. All misidentifications to be reported within 1 hour with video. Masters began insisting the team leader sign the log alongside the OOW. The word misidentification became an unspoken weight at every watch change. A micro-story from the same week kept surfacing in crew messes. A chief officer from that ship sat in a bare room answering questions in a language he barely spoke. He tried to describe the light on the water, the way the skiff's bow lifted, the shadow of what might have been a hook. He failed. Months later, he still woke at 0200 hearing the thump of rounds in air and the slap of bodies. The court case dragged on. The newspapers moved on. His sleep didn't. Insurers tightened the screws. Approval lists shrank. Training requirements expanded. Video evidence shifted from best practice to de facto mandate. Use of force was rewritten with phrases that left less air. Imminent threat defined. Escalation ladder codified. Incident templates standardized with timestamps, GPS, images, and 2 witness statements. Premium incentives flipped. Firms that could prove restraint got better terms than firms that promised aggression. States found leverage. Prosecutors discovered that the legal twilight around floating armories and flags of convenience made great pressure points. Seizures turned into bargaining chips for bilateral agreements. A few governments pushed for onshore armories and tighter licensing. Others created fee structures that monetized the grey. PMSCs responded with compliance hires and mock trials for team leaders, teaching them how a 5-second burst could unwind a company's year. The industry grew up a notch. Bravado turned into briefing. Captains reclaimed language on the bridge. Team leaders advised. Masters decided. Logs reflected both. Crews drilled misidentification prevention as seriously as Citadel procedures. Spotlight, hail, horn, turn, hold fire until unambiguous intent. The rifles didn't vanish. The swagger did. The lesson stuck. In water where the law is layered and cameras are everywhere, the first casualty of a sloppy squeeze isn't a claim, it's legitimacy. Sanctions, shadow fleets, and ghost flags. While courtrooms argued over misidentification, a different market learned to thread needles at scale. Sanctions tightened on oil and grain from blacklisted states, and a grey armada assembled. Old tankers repainted, reflagged, and routed through places where questions arrived slower than cargo. They weren't pirates. They were professionals of concealment, running voyages that lived between lines of law, finance, and insurance. Stakes were blunt. A sanctioned cargo meant frozen payments, seized ships, and crews stranded under arrest. But the price differential was irresistible. A single run could earn what months of clean trade wouldn't. Owners who wouldn't touch it still felt the ripple, because freight rates, port queues, and insurer appetites shifted with every dark convoy that slipped past. Here's how the action worked. A tanker bought second-hand at a steep premium changed its name in a registry office that never asked many questions. A shell company in Hong Kong owned it. A manager in Dubai operated it. A flag of convenience in a tiny island nation issued papers overnight. AIS behavior turned elastic. The transponder went dark near a known transfer zone. Satellite imagery later showed 2 hulls side by side, hoses stretched like vines, cargo moving by night. At dawn, the lights came back on, and a new destination appeared, for orders, then a port with enough plausible deniability to accept the story. Ghost flags did their part. They rented legitimacy without scrutiny. If one registry grew nervous, another took its place. A fresh call sign, a new MMSI, an IMO number painted over and reapplied with a stencil a grade schooler could have cut. Paperwork flowed through boutique law firms that wrote opinions aligning reality with policy. Bank wires traced through layered accounts until compliance officers gave up or priced the mystery as risk and moved on. Private security didn't vanish. It pivoted. Firms that once sold rail guns and razor wire now sold route hygiene. They plotted SDS rendezvous zones outside territorial seas, briefed masters on spoofing hotspots, and paired with compliance consultancies to script the voyage's narrative. When to signal, when to darken, which emergency justified an unscheduled stop. Some bundled insurance workarounds, non-Western insurers with looser exclusions, letters of indemnity dressed as routine. It wasn't brazen, it was procedural. Insurers fought with matrices and exclusions. War and sanctions clauses gave them leverage, but enforcement fractured. Western cover withdrew. Alternative markets stepped in with lower limits, higher deductibles, and plenty of caveats. A captain saw a certificate that looked familiar. A claims handler saw a reinsurance tower that wouldn't hold after a spill. The voyage sailed anyway because the charterer needed barrels on the other end, and the margin covered the gamble. Micro story. A tanker slipped into a remote anchorage at dusk. Crew rigged fenders, hoses ran, and within 6 hours, a third of her load had crossed to a vessel whose AIS insisted it was at anchor 50 miles away. The chief officer signed a transfer log that matched nothing on his deck. He logged fatigue and drank bad coffee. 2 weeks later, a tug nudged the ship into an unfamiliar port where a customs officer smiled too much and stamped too fast. The crew sent money home and stopped asking where the oil began. Regulators chased phantoms. Port state control teams learned new tells. Mismatched paint around IMO numerals, fresh weld lines over old names, crew lists that looked copy-pasted, logbooks with times that didn't align. Some ports detained and fined. Others took fees and winked. Meanwhile, OSINT labs watched from space. Satellite frames stitched into animations showing dark SDS rings off Ceuta, the Laconian Gulf, the Persian Gulf's edge. Reports made headlines, and routes shifted a few miles over. Data vendors smelled opportunity. Deceptive shipping practices became a category with dashboards, risk scores, and heat maps of dark activity. Banks subscribed to avoid financing ghosts. Legitimate owners subscribed to avoid sharing anchorages with fire traps. Brokers folded those scores into compliance packs. Too high a deception index and cover evaporated. The shadow fleet adapted, learned new spoofing patterns, and kept moving. Flags mattered until they didn't. A registry with a scandal saw a week of bad press. Charters detoured to ships with cleaner paperwork. Then freight tightened, rates spiked, and memories shortened. Commodity traders did the math and hired lawyers to write assurance letters. The risk moved, never vanished. Each seizure somewhere pushed 3 voyages somewhere else. The human angle sat in the mess room. Crews on these hulls lived with double stress, the sea's normal violence and the constant threat of a knock at midnight from a patrol boat with a grievance. Hazard pay rose. So did churn. A bosun told a mate quietly that he didn't sign up to lie on forms. The mate nodded, stared at a newly painted placard, and finished his tea. Impact bled into clean trades. War risk premiums for certain lanes rose even for honest ships because models saw clusters, not morals. Ports tightened inspections for everyone. Legit carriers lost days over other people's disguises. The grey profit still penciled until a spill. Then everyone paid, and a headline blamed a flag most viewers had never heard of. This wasn't a sideshow. It was an alternative nervous system for moving sanctioned goods, stitched by lawyers, fixers, and data gaps, with private security now guiding behavior as much as guarding rails. Non-state networks choreographed entire voyages off the official stage, proving that control at sea could be manufactured with paperwork, proxies, and the right kind of silence. Cyber at sea, spoofed seas and hacked bridges. While shadow fleets gamed registries, another front opened where nobody wore life jackets, the bridge computers. The sea didn't just have lanes, it had code, and code fails quietly. A captain in the Eastern Med watched his ECDIS draw his own ship onto land for 3 heartbeats before the track snapped back. GPS spoofing, the techs would say later. In the moment, it was doubt. Doubt at sea is dangerous. Stakes were brutal because cyber turns navigation into negotiation. If a ship's position can be faked, a collision isn't an accident, it's a liability argument. If a port's terminal goes dark under ransomware, schedules buckle across continents. And if a pirate, a militia, or a state-fed crew injects phantom hazards into your charts, the line between caution and paralysis blurs. Insurers saw it as contagion risk. Owners saw it as a new bill. Crews felt it as vertigo at 0200. Action arrived as glitches first. GPS jitter near known spoofing zones. AIS echoes cloning a ship's identity, broadcasting it hundreds of miles away while the real hull steamed blind. Bridges saw ghost convoys crossing their bows at impossible speeds. ECDIS alarms stacked. Integrity lost. Position unreliable. Chart mismatch. Masters reverted to old skills. Dead reckoning, parallel indexing, celestial on clear nights. While a $20 million ship sailed like it was 1965, with too much automation still humming around it. Then the hits grew louder. A port on the Black Sea took a ransomware note and slowed to manual cranes for a week. A container terminal in northern Europe locked out bookings, and trucks idled 10 deep. An onboard network infected by a phishing email froze a power management console mid-maneuver. The chief engineer yanked breakers like a surgeon. The incident report said no damage. The crew's hands shook any. Micro-story. A second officer received an email from Fleet IT asking him to update a certificate. He clicked because the night was long and the message looked right. Hours later, the chart server lagged, then looped. Backup came online with a lag that put the ship 50 meters off a plotted course. The old man ordered manual steering and a speed reduction while the ECDIS rebooted. They cleared the headland with room to spare. The second officer filed a voluntary confession and sat through a remedial course. He kept the mug that read, in small black letters, "Trust but verify." Private cyber firms smelled the same future the guards once did. They bundled hardening, monitoring, and incident response as subscriptions. A vendor installed network segmentation on a car carrier in Piracy, isolating the ECDIS, engine controls, crew Wi-Fi, and the OT bus. They pushed intrusion detection that listened for odd chatter on the bridge LAN. They ran tabletop exercises, spoofed GPS, simulated ransomware, ECDIS corruptions. The captain learned new commands that weren't helm orders: disconnect, contain, failover. Insurers rewrote riders to keep pace. Cyber clauses demanded minimum controls, multi-factor authentication on bridge systems where feasible, offline backups of critical charts and configurations, phishing drills documented quarterly, and an incident response runbook tested annually. Premiums eased when owners bought the bundle and proved the drills. They tightened when companies waved it off as overkill. After a high-profile port hack, the war risk market quietly asked if cyber defenses were equivalent to shore-based best practice before binding cover on hot routes. Equivalent became a word that could move a seven-figure line. Meanwhile, attackers got creative. Spoofing didn't just hide, it herded. A ring of false GNSS transmitters nudged ships into an anchorage where facilitators waited with offers. Fake port emails redirected pilots to different rendezvous points, delaying one convoy long enough to miss a safe window. Malware crafted for marine OT tried to jump from crew laptops to power management via a misconfigured file share. The attacks didn't have to succeed to profit. Uncertainty could be monetized. OSINT and defense vendors offered countermeasures that sounded like science fiction and felt like seatbelts. Multi-constellation receivers cross-checked GPS with Galileo and GLONASS. Inertial nav bridged spoofed gaps. Radar video correlation flagged positional lies. Some ships carried portable RF sniffers on the bridge, alarms tuned to suspicious GNSS emissions. ECDIS vendors pushed patches, but patching at sea lagged reality. A chief mate joked that the ship sailed with a quarter-inch of steel and a quarter-inch of unpatched firmware. A micro-story from a congested strait landed in several safety meetings. Two tankers approached a turn when their AIS plots diverged from reality by 70 meters. Both captains hailed, both saw the same phantom. One relied on the vector. The other trusted the radar range and bearing and his own eyeballs on the wing. He held course. The near miss turned into a safe pass by meters. Later, the insurer's question was simple. Were cyber drills conducted, and did standing orders define sensor priority under suspected spoofing? 1, yes, lowered a deductible. 1, no, raised eyebrows. Crew training lagged because crews already carried a dozen other burdens. Phishing on board remained the entry point. Shore leave meant new apps, new chargers, new pathways into ship networks. Cyber teams ashore pushed USB control, network lockdowns, and stern lectures about WhatsApp links. Sailors shrugged, then watched a drill where a fake email almost bricked their charts. Habits shifted a little. Impact circled back to control. Cyber riders dictated tech stacks. Vendors became gatekeepers. A recognized monitoring service could make a voyage insurable the way a recognized guard company once did. Captains added cyber posture to masters' reviews with pilots. Port state inspectors asked for evidence of ECDIS patch levels. The invisible war moved through wires and waves, and the same old pattern emerged. States issued guidance, markets enforced it. The sea didn't care about code, but the ships did. And the new commanders, underwriters, brokers, data vendors added one more requirement for passage. Keep your charts honest, your networks quiet, and your crew skeptical. Otherwise, even a perfect weight could be drawn crooked by someone you'll never see. Captains, crews, and the human cost. By the time the checklist hits the bridge, the captain's job has split into 4. He's still the navigator, but now he's also the compliance officer for 2 insurers, the client liaison for a security team he didn't hire, and the interpreter of intel feeds that might be wrong by an hour. Authority becomes negotiation. The team leader says, recommend 30 knots through Sector Delta. The broker's note says, maintain 28 plus. The chief engineer shakes his head at fuel burn. The captain signs the line that will matter in a claims file. Stakes sit in the crew's shoulders. High alert transits used to be a sprint. Now they're marathons of watch rotations, citadel drills, and half-sleep in steel rooms with bottled air. A bosun who's done 3 Red Sea runs in 5 months can list the sound of every alarm by pitch. He jokes less. He keeps a packed grab bag under his bunk and a second toothbrush in the citadel, because the first one will get left behind when the horn goes. The rhythm on board is a human metronome set to other people's dashboards. At 60, the mate runs a drone recognition brief. Silhouettes, wingspans, likely approach vectors. At 120, the crew drills the citadel. Water, canned food, a first aid kit, the sat phone with numbers taped to the back. Company, club, task force, family. At 180, fatigue shows in small mistakes. Wrong page in the log, a misheard bearing, a hand lingering too long on a rail that's hot under the sun. Micro story. 48 hours into a lockdown, a car carrier holds position after a cluster of attacks upstream. The master orders EMCON light, crew inside, no smoking on deck. The cook stretches 2 meals into 3 and writes a menu on a whiteboard he wipes with his sleeve. The chief engineer walks the engine room with a flashlight because the sensors are powered down. Someone puts a phone to a vent to get a signal bar and calls a sleeping child on a different continent. I'll be late, he says. I'm fine. He isn't, not really. Another micro story slides in at dawn. A Denny'd port call. The captain lines up for a berth, then a message arrives. Enhanced inspection regime for vessels without certified convoy proof. The proof is delayed in an inbox ashore. The ship peels off into anchorage. Crew who have promised shore leave watch the cranes over someone else's ship. The union rep's email is polite and hard. Fatigue reports are up. Deviation for safety must be respected. The owner's reply is careful. We support the master's discretion. Document the decision. Recruitment changes in the margins. Owners ask for veterans, people who can hold a rail under stress and swallow a checklist whole. The pipeline delivers, but burnout clocks faster than promotion. A third officer refuses a 4th consecutive high-risk transit and takes a coastal job with worse pay and better sleep. A chief mate stares at overtime and wonders if it pays for anxiety he can't name. Hazard pay looks good on paper until it meets a 2 a.m. thump on the hull in a narrow sea. Families do the math, too. A spouse reads headlines about drones and dark fleets and learns new terms like listed area and additional premium. Calls come at odd hours, or not at all when the ship goes radio quiet for security. A ransom call at dawn to another crew on another ship becomes a ghost in the kitchen. Everyone hears the story through friends, and it sits at the table during breakfast. Unions push for a seat in routing decisions. If a run means 3 extra drills per watch and a citadel that's more than theatre, they want it in writing. Minimum rest, maximum consecutive risk area days, mental health support that's more than a poster. Some owners sign frameworks that let captains deviate for crew safety without penalty. Others wait for the clauses to become standard and let the clubs do the enforcing. Authority on the bridge reassembles itself in small ways. The captain rewrites standing orders. Intel is advisory, not command. The master retains final say. The log reflects consensus and dissent. Team leaders adjust to being advisors, not chiefs. The crew's confidence rises when they see their judgment survive a checklist. The cost isn't only stress, it's culture. Sailors used to trade stories about ports and weather. Now they trade subscription levels and escort codes. The sea still has beauty, flying fish at sunrise, a flat calm that feels like a blessing, but the soundtrack is risk arithmetic. When the ship clears the last waypoint and the war premium stops ticking, the captain stands on the wing, breathes once, and knows they'll do it again in 3 weeks. The ocean hasn't changed. The burden on the people crossing it has. Consolidation and cartels, who really calls the shots? By the time crews adapted and captains rewrote standing orders, the center of gravity had moved again, upstream, into a handful of offices that no one at sea would ever see. The first tell was how fast quotes started to look identical. Different logos, same conditions. Brokers whispered about market alignment. Operators felt it as déjà vu. Every risk score, every clause, every approved vendor list converging like ships to a single waypoint. Stakes were quiet but massive. If a few desks set the rules, entire fleets danced to one rhythm. A rating change in a model tweaked port calls on 3 continents. A new clause template added 10 minutes to every drill in thousands of cabins. The cost wasn't just money, it was choice. When security became a platform and risk a subscription, captains, owners, and even navies became users of systems they didn't design. Action looked like consolidation disguised as convenience. PMSCs with rail teams stitched intel, cyber, and escort liaison into platform plays. A guard provider merged with a data vendor. A cyber shop partnered with a reinsurer. A broker took a stake in an incident reporting firm. Each move reduced friction for clients. It also narrowed the lanes. If you wanted the best premium on a hot route, you needed the bundle. Their intel, their cyber, their escort slotting. Deviate, and the price reminded you who held the joystick. Meanwhile, reinsurers, names most sailors never hear, quietly capped appetites. They didn't tell a ship not to sail. They told underwriters what aggregate risk they'd tolerate in a corridor week by week. The result flowed downhill. Only so many covers bound for a given transit window, only so many vessels of certain classes, higher rates after a cluster of alerts. From the bridge, it felt like weather. From London and Zurich, it was capacity management. Data vendors became arbiters. Their risk ratings weren't law, but charters, clubs, and lenders embedded them into decisions. A red polygon on a Wednesday meant half a dozen owners pushed ETAs, a dozen brokers resubmitted quotes, and 100 crews reset watches. One vendor's amber could be another S red. But the market coalesced around a few dashboards because those dashboards sat in insurers' binders and banks' covenants. Choice collapsed into standard. Micro story. A mid-sized owner tried to go off-platform, hire a cheaper guard firm, subscribe to an OSINT-only feed, pass on the cyber bundle. On renewal, the broker's spreadsheet flagged 3 non-conformities. The quote arrived with a smile and a penalty that erased the savings twice over. The owner called around. Every market read from the same sheet. He signed the bundle. His captains never knew the fight existed. Price spikes turned into rents. Every crisis moved money toward intermediaries with leverage. The bundle sellers, the model keepers, the capacity allocators. Risk didn't vanish. It was curated. A convoy slot at 20 Tuesday held a premium not just for safety, but for the right to stay inside the algorithm's green band. Vendors learned to message risk without spooking markets, language calibrated to lift price without killing demand. Lobbying slid in through guidelines. Industry roundtables drafted best practices that mirrored vendor offerings. Recognized intel provider subscriptions defined cyber baselines, escort liaison protocols. Nothing mandatory, everything strongly recommended. Within months, clubs referenced the guidelines. Banks asked about adherence. Port states borrowed the phrasing for inspection checklists. A suggestion became a choke point by consensus. The BUT showed up in courtrooms and boardrooms. A near miss in a convoy produced claims skirmishes that ended with a settlement tied to separation rules only a few platforms could enforce. Therefore, those platforms became de facto gatekeepers of safe formation. A ransomware strike at a terminal led to a clause requiring monitored cyber posture. Therefore, ships without a named service paid more or waited longer. The pattern was neat. Incident, clause, consolidation. Not all consolidation was predatory. Some of it solved real gaps. integrated bridges of risk, intel to escort to cyber to claims evidence, reduced stupid losses. But the power concentrated. A port agent in Mombasa muttered that he used to call 3 people to fix a schedule. Now he called one platform rep who could move convoys, premiums, and patrol timings with a message. It worked, until it didn't. The crew felt the cartelization as monotony. Every risk brief looked the same because it came from the same feed. Every drill ticked the same boxes because the clause said so. Captains appreciated the clarity and resented the leash. Owners enjoyed stability and hated the lock-in. Brokers smiled. Margins improved when options shrank. Unknown to most, governments were users too. Task forces peeked at private dashboards to time patrols. Regulators asked vendors for snapshots they couldn't build in-house. States leaned on the same black boxes they couldn't audit. When a model overestimated risk for a week, half the world's schedules slipped. Nobody apologized. The spreadsheet moved on. And there was this: incentives to prolong managed risk. An entirely safe sea earns no premium. An entirely chaotic one kills trade. Between those poles lives a sweet spot where security sells and insurance prices, platforms grow and ships still sail. The people in those rooms won't say it out loud. They don't have to. The lanes tell the story in their curves. States push back. Lawfare, corridors, and quasi-navies. While platforms tighten their grip, governments tried to grab the wheel back with tools they still owned. Laws, grey hulls, and time on station. The pitch wasn't swagger, it was procedure. If markets had engineered obedience with premiums, states would engineer it with corridors and courtrooms. Stakes were clear. Let private gatekeepers rule, and elected authority melts into advisories. Let sea lanes drift into grey, and a spill, a sinking, or a seizure turns into a diplomatic crisis with no lever to pull. Ministers wanted something they could point to when shelves went bare. A corridor, a decree, a prosecution. Action started with formalized lanes that looked like military operations and read like insurance annexes. Multinational patrols, coalitions with acronyms, published security corridors through hot water. Entry conditions copied the market's checklists. Pre-register, report positions at fixed intervals, maintain minimum speed, keep EMCON discipline, join at waypoints, follow the lead hull. A destroyer or frigate set the pace. Patrol aircraft stitched a canopy overhead. The promise was simple. Transit here, under these rules, and your risk drops enough to keep your policy alive. To make lanes stick, governments braided public power to private compliance. Naval task forces opened slots. Brokers relayed allocations. Intel vendors piped corridor timings into subscriber dashboards. A captain did request escort, so much as book a window. Miss it, and you waited for the next tranche like an airline passenger watching a departure board. Public protection, private scheduling. Meanwhile, prosecutors turned to lawfare. Floating armories that drifted inside territorial seas saw dawn boardings and fines wrapped in environmental pretext. Facilitators pushing expedited passage found themselves indicted for unlicensed security services, money laundering, or violations of export controls on dual-use kit. Sanctions brokers who stitched shadow routes for oil and grain met customs officers in courtrooms where AIS gaps and shell companies became exhibits. The cases weren't glamorous, but they froze bank accounts and chilled the grey. States leveraged paperwork as weapons. Export controls tightened on electronic warfare boxes and decoy launchers, reclassifying them as controlled items. A vendor that once shipped a crate to a warehouse in Fujairah now needed an export license, end-user certificates, and audits that matched serial numbers on decks at sea. Violations meant seizure and the kind of headlines that sink a business. Private air defense at sea. Ambitions ran face first into customs law. Quasi-navies emerged where politics allowed. Some countries hoisted their flag over private guards, deputizing teams as state security detachments under strict row and command chains. The incentive was legal clarity, a uniform under a national flag, a rifle with a state serial, evidence handled like police property. Insurers liked the provenance. Coastal states tolerated the colors. The price rose, but so did cover certainty. In parallel, Coast Guards rented presence as cost recovery escorts, invoicing protection like a service without saying the quiet part. Microstory. A chemical tanker waited off a corridor gate, late by 40 minutes. The escort window was closing. A liaison officer on the lead frigate granted a squeeze. Last in, maintained 24 knots, no deviation. The master pushed the throttles, the chief engineer grimaced, and the ship slid into a formation flanked by 2 national hulls. 8 hours later, in safer water, an email arrived from the owner. Surcharge approved. Insurer endorsement attached. Crew bonus logged. The lane had worked, but it ran on punctuality and paperwork. States also pushed data sharing MOUs. Private intel shops agreed to feed sanitized alerts to maritime operations centers. In return, they got early warnings from government sources. The latency dropped. So did pretense. Captains saw the same plot points on commercial tablets and military broadcasts, and the distinction between public and private intelligence blurred into one composite picture. Courts produced precedents that hardened the new normal. A collision inside a state corridor led to a bench ruling that carved liability along compliance lines. Ships that obeyed escort directives and documented adherence saw leniency. Those that freelanced paid. Charterers rewrote terms to require corridor use when available, shifting costs but preserving schedules. Law became lane discipline. Limits showed up fast. Politics moved slower than missiles. Parliamentary debates dragged. Insurers priced tomorrow's transit tonight. A ceasefire elsewhere didn't end drones here. Export controls chased yesterday's tech while attackers iterated. And when states tried to outlaw floating armories wholesale, operators shifted anchors 15 miles and changed flags. Markets adapted in hours. Ministries drafted for months. Still, pushback mattered. The corridor model created points of contact, common language, and a ladder to climb when things broke. Lawfare cracked a few grey keystones. Quasi-navies gave insurers a uniform they could underwrite. The price of ignoring the lane went up. The benefits of playing by a shared script became tangible. But the deeper truth lingered on every bridge. Control was negotiated daily. Governments brought guns and gavels. Markets brought money and models. Captains threaded the seam where both demanded signatures. And even as states reasserted themselves, the dashboards they leaned on still lived in private hands. The next shock, autonomous threats and AI risk markets. Everything tightened again when threats stopped needing pilots. Swarms arrived cheap, plastic hulls with outboard engines, quadcopters with shaped charges, gliders riding sea breeze. One operator with a laptop could deny a lane that once took a squadron. A rifle team on a rail couldn't outshoot a sky full of lawnmower motors. Stakes were brutal because autonomy scaled. A dozen $5,000 boats could force a $500,000 premium uplift without touching steel. A false positive swarm alert could idle a terminal. And models, the same engines that priced storms, started pricing intent. Action shifted to subscriptions with teeth. Air defense as a service, bundled radars, RF sniffers, dazzlers, decoys, and a contractor on retainer who could deploy a skiff with a jammer in 6 hours. Yield racks bolted near the bridge. Soft-kill launchers sat beside life rafts. One vendor's tablet fused drone acoustics, AIS, and satellite glints into a single threat dial. When it ticked red, captains didn't argue. Meanwhile, AI risk markets went live mid-voyage. Telemetry streamed. Speed, heading, M-profile, formation discipline. A model recalculated war risk pricing every hour and pushed incentives in real time. Shave 2 knots and dim deck lights, -8%. Join corridor window kilo, -12. Proceed solo through sector H, +35. Smart contracts escrowed the difference. The ship's wake drew its premium. Microstory. A box ship nearing Bab al-Mandab saw a swarm signature bloom on the vendor feed. The algorithm suggested a 14-mile offset and convoy merge in 90 minutes. Fuel burn rose. The risk price fell. The owner approved on the app. Minutes later, 3 low drones skimmed the original track and found nothing. The BUT, mispricing. One model overweighted a rumor, nudged fleets around the Cape, and emptied shelves 2 continents away. Appeals took days. Markets moved in hours. Governments watched from the same dashboards and followed the nudges they didn't control. The reveal, the new command chain of the sea. Here's where the curtain drops. The captain on the bridge isn't the one really calling the shot. He's executing a stack of invisible orders. The chain doesn't start at the flag state. It starts in rooms with no portholes, reinsurance towers, war committees, data vendors, and platform security firms that have quietly rewritten command at sea. At the top sit the reinsurers, names most crews never hear. They hold the capital that lets underwriters say yes or no. Their appetite limits aren't speeches. They're spreadsheets that cap how much risk a corridor can carry in a week. When they dial capacity down after a spike in incidents, underwriters respond, brokers echo, and ships wait. Invisible hands move wake patterns on two oceans. Right beside them, the joint war committees listed areas act like a switchboard. A committee meeting in London redraws a polygon on a map, and every ship manager on 3 continents feels it as a line in a charter email: notify, pay, comply. The committee doesn't set your throttle. It sets the conditions that make the throttle a financial decision. Listed becomes law by invoice. Then come the war risk underwriters and P&I clubs, a tandem that's become the sea's regulatory spine. Underwriters decide whether your hull gets covered to sail a route at all. Clubs decide whether the liabilities that follow you, crew injury, pollution, wreck removal, are insurable if anything goes wrong. Their clauses read like doctrine. Report here, train this, subscribe to that, escort under those rules, document everything. Miss a step, and the coverage you thought you had evaporates into exclusions. Feeding them is the risk data layer. A handful of vendors aggregate AIS, satellite frames, incident reports, and private alerts into risk ratings that become operational gospel. A dashboard flips from amber to red for a segment of the Gulf, and within hours you see it in the real world. Convoys slip their timings, owners file deviation notices, port berths reshuffle. Governments check the same feeds because speed beats sovereignty, and the market's heat map sets the tone for their advisories. Tied into that, the platformed PMSCs have fused muscle to metadata. They don't just put people on rails anymore. They sell escort slots, broker corridor windows, stitch in cyber monitoring, and carry liaison phones to task forces. They've become operators of access. If you want the best premium, you take their package. Their intel, their compliance logs, their approved armory, their convoy schedule. The rifle on your rail is just the visible part of a much larger leash. Owners and captains optimize to this chain, not to their flags. A flag state might issue guidance. The club issues terms. The underwriter issues conditions. The data vendor issues a rating. The PMSC issues a slot. The captain's standing orders absorb all of it. He can still say no, and sometimes he does. But every no carries a surcharge, a delay, or a coverage query. So in the practical sense, the command is already written before he clears the breakwater. Non-state actors exploit the chain because they understand where cost lies. A militia doesn't have to sink a ship to hit a nerve. It just has to push a corridor's risk rating high enough to trigger a reinsurance wobble and a war risk hike. One drone overflies a lane, 3 insurers blink, and a week's worth of schedules slide. Threat, claim, profit. It turns into a cycle that rewards the nudge more than the kill. Governments rely on this chain even as they claim to command. Patrols are plotted against the same threat maps they didn't produce. Security corridors are booked through private liaisons and broker emails. Prosecutors build cases with video and logs collected by security vendors because that's the evidence that exists. In briefings, officers point to commercial summaries and call them current ops. It works. It's also a quiet admission. The operating picture and the rules of passage are mediated by companies. So the sea is governed, but not by flags and statutes alone. It's governed by contracts, ratings, alerts, and endorsements, enforceable by money. A club circular has the effect of a regulation because a claim depends on it. A model update acts like a notice to mariners because a bank covenant references it. A convoy booking is more binding than a naval promise because an underwriter priced it hours ago. Micro story. A bulker off Oman gets a last-minute email. Its war risk binder will attach only if it merges with a corridor at 20 and keeps 17 knots through a specified box. The master glances at fuel figures, at sea state, at crew fatigue. Ashore, the owner taps accept on a broker platform. The PMSC confirms slot. The data vendor's polygon ticks from red to amber. The captain cons to the waypoint. He isn't obeying a government order. He's following the new command chain. There's a rhythm here that rewards predictability. If you're a vendor, predictability lets you sell assurance. If you're an insurer, predictability lets you price risk. If you're a non-state threat, predictability gives you leverage because you can script your pressure to trigger model reactions. The ocean didn't become simpler. We just made it legible to money, and money prefers lanes with gates. This is the moment everything changed. For centuries, command at sea meant a flag, a fleet, and a signal lamp. Now it means a capacity limit on a reinsurance treaty, a listed area update, a risk rating on a private dashboard, and a platform that can move you into or out of the green. Master's authority still matters. So does seamanship. But the decisive orders are issued upstream, translated into premiums and protocols, and carried onto bridges as best practice. You can hear it in how captains talk. They used to say, "We'll take weather on the bow and make our time." Now they say, "We'll take the 60 corridor slot and hold 26 clubs endorsed, riders attached." Different language, same intent. Keep the ship safe, keep the schedule. Only now, safety and schedule are administered by entities no lookout can see. And here's the uncomfortable symmetry. Everyone sits under the same roof. Reinsurers tolerating risk spikes as long as corridor discipline holds. War committees adjusting polygons with one eye on losses and another on navies, patrol plans. Data vendors tuning models to avoid panic while keeping clients sticky. PMSCs selling slots that double as compliance. Owners optimizing to the cost curve. Captains threading compliance with weather and weariness. Militias peeking in at the edges, tapping the glass to watch the models ripple. That's the new command chain of the sea. Capital sets the ceiling, committees draw the map, models color the lanes, contracts bind behavior, platforms gate the doors, and ships obey. Not because a canon says so, but because a clause does. Governments are in the loop. They're just no longer the only loop that matters. Breakpoints, reforms, and the price of control. If the command chain now runs through contracts and dashboards, the only way to bend it is to change the terms those systems run on. Not with speeches, but with friction at the right joints, places where fear becomes price, and where a better record can shave a premium instead of adding one. Start with sunlight. Transparent incident reporting sounds dull until it moves millions. Right now, a rumor in a corridor can lift a model's risk score for a week. Replace the rumor with structured facts, time-stamped, geolocated with standardized categories for sighting, near-miss, impact. Make it the norm that every alert is followed by a short, auditable report from the ship, anonymized and pooled across fleets. Suddenly, outliers look like outliers. The model cools faster. Insurers can step premiums down without guessing. Owners who publish beat owners who hide, and that competition squeezes the fear premium's air. But transparency only works if someone checks the wiring. Independent audits of PMSCs, Armories, cyberstacks, intel feeds, turn vendor claims into something a claims handler can trust without 3 phone calls. Imagine an accreditation registry that's not captured by the platforms it rates. Randomly sampled incident files, surprise ride-alongs, simulated attacks that test whether SOPs work in motion. Tie audit scores to incentives, lower deductibles, faster claims, corridor priority. The quiet message is simple: prove you're good, not loud. Port state control and flags can do their part by closing the loopholes that let floating armories and grey registries act as risk laundries. Harmonize rules on weapons custody at sea. A shared baseline for bonded lockers, transfer logs, and evidence chain protocols that don't evaporate offshore. If a flag wants to certify an armory, require the video, the RFID seals, the third-party stock checks, then publish the list. Coastal states can stop playing whack-a-mole at 12 nautical miles if the armory standards upstream aren't subject to the lowest bidder. There's a version of public muscle that doesn't require endless carrier groups, targeted naval guarantees on core corridors, not blanket promises, but time-bounded, lane-bounded commitments that say, between waypoint X and Y, at these hours, ships meeting criteria A, B, C have state protection sufficient to reduce war risk rates by N%. Behind that sentence sits a treasury backstop or reinsurance participation, government skin in the same game the market plays. It's expensive. It's also cheaper than a panic that detours half the trade around a continent for a month. Make this fair at the human level, build crew-centric standards with insurance teeth. Define minimum rest in listed areas that's actually respected. Specify citadel provisioning that recognizes 48 hours isn't a fantasy. Require mental health support that isn't a flyer on the notice board. If a ship can prove compliance, logbook entries cross-checked with engine room data, drill records tied to actual watches, give it rate relief. If not, price the risk it's pushing onto tired hands. The leverage lives in the binder, not the poster. Cyber is the same story with different jargon. Mandate a baseline that's doable at sea. Network segmentation between OT and IT. Offline backups of ECDIS and configs. MFA where humanly possible. Quarterly phishing drills. And a rehearsed isolation plan. Don't make masters beg for patches that arrive 3 port calls late. Put cyber readiness into port state checks the way lifeboats are, and let a clean certificate shave a margin. The lesson from every port hack is that contagion doesn't care about intent. It cares about the weakest link's open port. There's a harder reform that cuts into the business model, separating the referee from the player. If a platform sells intel and also allocates escort slots based on that intel, you've built a feedback loop that tempts abuse even if no one intends it. Create firewalls. Require disclosure when a risk rating feeds a product the same company profits from. Better yet, standardize a core risk taxonomy, open enough that different vendors can plug their feeds into the same language. You don't end a monopoly by shouting at it. You end it by making interoperability the cost of entry. On the finance side, bring reinsurers into the daylight without scaring them off. A voluntary corridor capacity bulletin, aggregated, anonymized, can keep owners from piling into a thin window that triggers a capacity wobble. If markets know roughly what the capital ceiling is this week for Sector Delta, they plan. If they don't, they stampede. Pair that with a public cooling period protocol after high visibility incidents. A 24-hour data verification cycle before models push red across the map. It won't stop caution. It might stop overreaction. And then the trade-offs, the parts nobody can spin. Every control has a cost. Full spectrum audits slow a market that prides itself on speed. Corridor guarantees tie warships to lanes while other crises brew. Crew standards pull rotations tight and peril up. Cyber baselines force upgrades on small operators who already live thin. Transparency risks litigation because the minute you publish an error, someone will turn it into an exhibit. So who pays? Spread it honestly. If a retailer wants just-in-time delivery through a listed area, fold a security resilience surcharge into the freight they pay and earmark it, not to general revenue, but to the pieces that lower systemic risk, audits, crew support, cyber kits, and corridor patrol fuel. If a government wants lanes open, let it co-insure a corridor tranche and publish the terms. If a vendor wants to be the gatekeeper, require open APIs and third-party testing as the price of that power. There are breakpoints that don't look like reforms until you feel them on board. An independent ombuds for incident disputes, so a master isn't fighting a coverage denial alone. A shared evidentiary standard for misidentification cases that preserves context instead of scapegoats. A rule of thumb written into charters that says, deviate for crew safety and document, no penalty. Each is small. Together, they shift the center of gravity back towards seamanship under pressure, not compliance under duress. None of this restores some golden age of flags and signal lamps. It doesn't need to. It just nudges the command chain toward accountability you can point at. Less rumor, more record. Fewer black boxes, more audits. Real muscle where it matters, and rights for the people who actually stand the watches. The price is real. So is the return. lanes that stay open because they're disciplined, not because they're opaque. And a captain who can look at a clause and see not a leash, but a lifeline he can trust. Closing loop. One ship, one decision, global consequences. Back on that freighter, the one from the opening, the alarms had settled into a steady, hateful rhythm. The master stood with one elbow on the chart table, eyes flicking between weather, engine room temps, and a broker email that read like a verdict. Corridor slot available at 24, merge speed 18 knots, deck lights to dark, comms disciplined, cyber rider active. Accept within 10 minutes or lose the discount and the window. He weighed the math that wasn't on any paper. The crew was 2 drills deep and 1 watch short. The chief engineer had fuel figures that said 18 knots now meant slower later. The PMSC team leader held his liaison phone like a passport and said, "The slot is clean." On another screen, a private intel map pulsed amber at one waypoint, red at another. Off the bow, the sea was black and indifferent. Stakes arrived in lines and decimals. If he declined, the war risk premium ticked up 35%, and the insurer moved his binder into a column called conditional. If he accepted and missed the merge by 5 minutes, the slot evaporated and he burned fuel without protection. Either way, a failure would land on someone's desk far from steel and spray. He signed his name on a tablet no sailor in his youth could have imagined, and the clock started. Action tightened. The helmsman called minor course adjustments to bleed the right minutes. The PMSC team leader coordinated with the convoy liaison in clipped phrases, the secret handshake of this new era: waypoint, speed, separation, M profile. The chief engineer brought another generator online to give the ship a steadier hum. In the wheelhouse, the cyber monitor logged increased RF noise, spoofing likely, not yet confirmed. The captain nodded once, ordered radar-ranged fixes every 5 minutes, and split the bridge team in 2, one to fly the ship, one to hold the evidence. Unknown to them, a drone 3 miles off traced the corridor, just close enough to nudge a model, not close enough to compel a shot. The risk vendor's dial ticked a shade darker. In London, an underwriter adjusted a line. In Singapore, a charterer resequenced berths by half a day. No missiles, no headlines. Just a ripple in price that moved the world by hours. The merge came as a line of dimmed shapes, each a freighted decision like theirs. A frigate's navigation lights blinked once, the convoy tightened, and the formation settled into a pace no one loved but everyone could ensure. The PMSC team leader exhaled. The captain didn't. He watched the wake, the spacing, the horizon, and the clock that governed how long the insurer's endorsement promised to stand behind him. Micro-story inside the larger one. A deckhand who'd never seen combat stood by a fire station with gloves already sweating, thinking about his mother's last message. Don't be a hero, be clever. Beside him, a carpenter from Cebu muttered a prayer he'd said since tuna boats, except now he added the names of apps and companies he didn't understand. On the bridge, the second officer corrected a drift that existed only on one screen and not on the radar overlay, resisting the urge to trust the cleaner picture. They cleared the worst of it at 53, grey light trying to make the sea look ordinary again. In the inbox, 3 messages arrived like stepping stones. The data vendor shifted the polygon to amber becoming green. The underwriter system applied the discount promised, down to the decimal. The PMSC liaison texted that the Armory rendezvous ahead had room for an early disembark, if they kept time. Then the economics closed the loop. The owner's back office booked the saved premium as a line of margin. A buyer in a landlocked distribution center saw a new ETA and pushed a promotion by 2 days. A supermarket reset shelf tags on goods that had slept through the night on a sea corridor guarded by a frigate and administered by contracts. Somewhere else, a smaller carrier without the bundle read the same risk feed too late, missed a slot, rerouted, and took a loss no headline would ever write about. Here's the turn most people miss. The attackers didn't need a sinking. They needed exactly what they got: a spike in modeled risk, a wobble in capacity, a week of detours that added days and dollars to schedules. Insurance booked the change. Fuel burned. Schedules stretched. The militia's video, grainy and triumphant, scored the movement of invisible money, not hulls. The captain walked onto the wing as the sun finally touched the rails. He'd done nothing dramatic. He'd defollowed the conditions written in rooms he'd never see, and he'd kept the ship and the people on it safe. He knew the price would slide through spreadsheets and end up in receipts a world away, fuel, freight, premiums. He also knew he'd do it again next voyage. Same corridor, different clock, same chain. Owners counted margin. Crews counted days. Markets charted the curve. The decision on that bridge, accept the slot, merge, hold formation, keep evidence, was just one ship, one night. It also nested inside a system where every choice is priced and every price steers a lane. Control at sea now lives right there, where money meets risk, and a captain signs a line that moves a continent by hours. The oceans didn't get safer. We outsourced who decides how we survive them, and the bill now writes the rules of the sea. If you want the names behind the dashboards and the deals shaping your deliveries, subscribe and watch our next chapter on the shadow fleets bankrolling these corridors. If this shifted how you see free trade, share it. One click forces the algorithm to keep following the money.